believe it or not, there's actually a negative relationship between having a pool and revenue. How much more revenue can you make by adding a pool?
It's fun in the sun! Everybody in the pool!
Now, this is a question we get a lot at IntelliHost because pools are pretty expensive. So basically what we did is we ran a linear regression on the relationship between revenue and having a pool. And let's dive into the details. So this is the plot graph that we did. So if the property had a pool, it got a score of 1. And obviously if it didn't have a pool, it got a score of 0. And then over here, the x-axis is the amount of revenue for each of the properties on our platforms. This is a sample set of roughly 15,000 properties that we sampled for this. It's a pretty healthy set. Now, the thing I will caveat here is that this is including all locations. Now, believe it or not, there's actually a negative relationship between having a pool and revenue.
You can't be serious.
I think this is important to explain because just because you have a pool doesn't mean you make more revenue. Park City, Utah, for example, you make more revenue for being closer to the ski slopes. Well, properties that have a pool are generally further from the ski slopes. And so there's a negative correlation, meaning properties that have pools generally make less revenue. Does that mean that the pool made them make less revenue? Of course not. That would be causal relationship. We're talking about correlated relationships here. So just make sure that you don't confuse those two things. Causal, correlation, very different, okay? The answer to the question, how much more can you make with a pool on average? $5,500. Now, again, that's across all locations, and we have properties in Australia and France and UK and all over the world. So that is the average. What I would say is there's some areas like Joshua Tree, California, where you can make up to 50 grand more per year for having a pool. That's less than a 1-year ROI. I guess in California, maybe they're charging 50 grand for a pool. That's probably what they cost now. What's interesting is this is on an intercept, meaning if you had no pool, what would you expect to make on average? And that number is 22,000. So by adding a pool on average, there was a 24% increase in revenue for having that. Now, let's look at some of these other metrics and I'll explain what they mean as well. That $5,000, $5,500 that I'm talking about, the range for that is somewhere between $4,000 to $7,000 with a 95% confidence interval. That means that we're 95% confident that if you add a pool, it's probably gonna be somewhere between there on average, again, total globe. When we look at the R-squared value, it's important to understand what this means. An R-squared value means how much of this increase can be explained by having a pool. And really, the strength is kind of low. A 1% R-squared, it is positive, but 1% means that like only 1% of the total increase could be accounted for the pool. Everything else could be natural variation, it could be randomness, it could be a lot of things, fairly low there. But the correlation is 8%. 8% is fairly high for, I'd say that's probably average for other amenities that we generally see on IntelliHost. If you want to look at like really high correlations, it's like number of bedrooms or additional capacity, that's like a 24% correlation. This is an 8% correlation, so there's definitely a positive relationship. But I think if you were to remove the locations that have a negative relationship, this would probably be much higher. So we actually have run this for each of the different cities across the globe, but due to lack of time, I wouldn't want to bore everybody by just listing them here.
Come on, I don't have all day.
If you want to know how much revenue you can make in your city, just message us in the comments below and we'll do our best to answer those and make sure that you have the information you need. There you have it. On average, it probably would take, maybe depending on the price of the pool, 7 to 8 years maybe to pay off the pool if you were to add it. But like I said, that's a 24% increase on revenue. So if you're doing 100 grand a year, 24% increase, well, it might pay for itself in about 1.5 years. If you want to know what else works on Airbnb, hit subscribe.